We need to fight against the extremists. We need to fight against people who have hijacked Islam in order to promote the culture of hate. And this is a key issue. And we need, to deconstruct the jihadist narrative. And in this connection, I have 2 more minutes. What Morocco has been doing. We were working to build up a strong democratic state. And I think Professor was saying, and you were saying, Mr. Moderator, that democracy, we need to build up strong states based on democracy, on good governance, and this is essential. And this is also to address the real issues of like climate change. And I think this is something that we would work together. Maybe I will come later on the experience of Morocco, thanks to the leadership of the king, to promote democracy and transformation of the economy. But I would like to conclude, I have 2 more minutes, that cooperation today is needed at all levels to ensure a peaceful and stable future for our region. We must absolutely work together at the regional, but also on the international level, because the depth of the problem should be addressed within the international community. We'll also, my third message, need to work with the new actors today, because government are essential, yes, but there are other actors like civil society, NGOs, etc. My fourth message, we live in the age of globalization, and this will not change. And we must stay ready to reshape, to rebuild new tools in order to work with this world. And finally, I think it is important in order to reach stability, for peace and stability, to try to engage with all the actors in the region.
Thank you so much. Now, with regard to globalization, I think 2 things might be noted. One of them is empirical research shows that those that are disturbed by globalization tend to be older people that are failing to make the adjustment to globalization. So it may be that we are seeing the last stand against globalization rather than the end of globalization. This is number one. But the second thing is globalization and homogenization should not necessarily mean the same thing. In other words, globalization may be a phenomenon that encourages integration worldwide without necessarily homogenizing the world. So these are 2 things to keep in mind. And as regards, if I may react to your suggestion about the need to strengthen the nation state, unless the nation states find a way to manage maybe multiplicity within them, what we'll end up with is highly authoritarian governments, and this is what we don't want. But let me stop there. We will have more to talk about. Et voilà, monsieur le professeur le plus distingué, Bertrand Badie, Sciences Po. What is the international system going to look like?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The international system now is considered as a global system. But I think that the main problem is that generally people don't know how to define globalization. And even political actors give generally a very dramatic picture of globalization and offer it as a scapegoat to the public opinion. And this is probably the main danger we are facing for the next years. In my vision, in my mind, for the future and the coming years, globalization means 3 things: inclusion, interdependence, and mobility. Inclusion, that's to say, for the first time in the history of humanity, we are facing a unified world, one world system. And previously, we faced a different system which was made of regional worlds. In these regional worlds, made of juxtaposition of different worlds, Europe and Western Europe considered itself as the main actor and probably the alone actor in the world system. And the most difficult now is to consider that this loneliness has been overcome. The second point is interdependence. Interdependence is something very important to consider because interdependence is exactly the opposite of sovereignty. We are no more in a sovereign world, but in an interdependent world. And what does it mean? It means first that competition is now more and more meaningless. Competition doesn't mean anything in a world made of interdependence. And the zero-sum strategy, which was the main particle strategy in the world now, is probably over. And this is very difficult to be concretized in our present world. But it means something much more important, is that now weak are depending on the strong. That is not new. But more and more now, the strongs are depending on the weaks. And this is transforming the international relations. That's to say, we are now in a system in which the weakest actors are much more powerful than they were previously. And the third point is mobility. Mobility means that migration will get more and more important and more normal. That's to say, now we know that the migrant is the future of the world, and we have to take it into account in the social balance of our world order. These three parameters, inclusion, interdependence, mobility, imply probably 5 major changes in international relations. First, we have to keep in mind that with globalization, we are now in the most unequal system that had never existed in the world history. That's to say, between the GDP per habitant in Malawi and in Norway, we have a big gap which would be impossible to manage in a normal society. The second point is, because of that, international social issues are now much more important in the international agenda than political and military issues. We have to consider that. Consider that starvation is killing about 6 to 9 million people every year. That's to say the equivalent of 8 attacks on World Trade Center per day. That's to say the social inequality is killing much more than terrorism, and is now getting the major issue in international relations and the main source of violence. The third point is that we are now not in an international world. I was professor of international relations, but now it doesn't mean anything. The new generation will be structured around the idea of intersocial relation. And my young colleagues will become intersocial relation professor. Intersociality is the main factor which is structuring the world. That means an increasing role of identity in the transformation of international relations. Fourth, a transformation of the nature of the international conflict. In the classic conception, war was a competition among powers. War was the result of the power politics. But now, war is exactly the opposite. War is the result of weakness politics. That's to say, collapse of the state, collapse of the nation, and insufficient human development index. If you take into account the list of the countries classified by their position in the international the Human Development Index, you will see that the poorest countries, all of them, are involved in lasting and very dangerous conflicts. That is something quite new, this new kind of competition of weakness. And that means also that international violence is less and less a political violence, but more and more a social violence. That's to say, the new conflicts are rooted in social inequalities and social intersocial relations rather than the classical vision of strategies. And the last one is the role of social imaginaries. You know that previously imaginary was a local imaginary and perhaps a national imaginary. But now in our world, all the poor people are not thinking according to their local environment, but according to the global environment. What is new now is that the poor see the rich, the poor see the powerful, and this creates a new kind of intersocial conflict. What does it mean about governing the world? This is my last point, is that the first priority is to promote what I would call, with Émile Durkheim, the international social integration. And we have to promote that. Second point is to promote international solidarity. And the third point would be to promote a global governance. That's to say, an inclusive world, an interdependent world cannot be ruled by a hierarchy, cannot be ruled by an oligarchy. And the club diplomacy is probably one of the main failures of our global world. We have to consider that without the weakest, we can't do anything, and we can't solve the new conflicts, because conflicts are not coming from the richest and from the most powerful, but from the most poor. If the G20 is including 90% of the international GDP, it's probably including something like 1% of the world sufferings. And so, without reintegrating these new actors, we have no chance to overcome our difficulties. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was very stimulating. Without much ado, I'll move on to the next speaker. We characterize our times as one of communications. And actually, we talked about globalization, and Wadah Khanfar is a part of this globalization process, but he has also successfully challenged it by establishing the Al Jazeera English area, which was dominated previously only by Western channels. So it will be particularly interesting to hear you about what the future looks like. Some people talk about post-truth politics. Are we going to move in that direction so that we shall lose our conceptions of what reality is, or shall we come back to our senses? What do you see?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Actually, before I became a journalist, I was, and I am still, a student of international politics, so I will start from there, and I will say the following. If we are going to think about the future, the first thing we need to learn is how to unlearn what we have been learning during the last 2 centuries. Why? This current moment in our human history is unique, and the uniqueness of it is not similar to other moments in history. I don't place the current situation in the same category of the post-Cold War era or the post-end of the Cold War and so on. I, in fact, think that the next 30 to 50 years are the time taking us to migrate from the post-Westphalia area, which means 2 centuries back, 2.5 centuries, the 17th century, into something new. And that something new, none of us who are sitting in this hall can imagine how it will look like. We can always talk about it. Why we can't talk about it? Because we have to talk about it. Some of us might, by the way, survive the 50 years to come, because given the fact that during the Roman Empire, the life expectancy was 22, 24 years old. In 2,000 years, we doubled it up to 48 in 1950. In 50 or 60 years, we doubled that. So our relationship with time and space, since the Homo sapiens left Africa, we have never seen a moment in history where our relationship with time and space is, in fact, shifting dramatically and radically. So the mind cannot maybe cope with the kind of changes that we might encounter. Just in 1990, I saw the facts first time. 1995, I sent email. Now, quantum physics are speaking about, sending humans and entities in no time to space, teleporting. We are talking about multiverses. We are talking about 11 dimensions. We are talking about nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, biotechnology. This universe we are looking forward to is not in any way similar to the continuity of a human experience the last 2,000 or 3,000 years. That's important for us to realize. Therefore, in my opinion, the next 30 years, we are going to witness 3 or 4 major changes. The first one in the thought and paradigm of thinking. Since the current moment is introducing to us the highest level of communication, and by the way, it is networking communication, not hierarchical. It means not necessarily built on top-bottom, but it is vertical through the internet and communication that we are going to encounter. We are going to develop our personal quality, our personal knowledge in a way that has never been presented before. We are going to accumulate intelligence which never been thought of in history. Second, we are going to use that to enable our sovereignty as individuals versus the nation-state sovereignty. And that's going to be a major trend in history. I personally feel and love the nation-state because I am accustomed to use geopolitics and functional realism as tools of analysis in politics, and I do this all over the world. But I must tell you, frankly, that globalization, which we have witnessed during the last few decades, nation-state, the concept of realism and its relationship with economy, and the new liberalism, all of these beautiful terminologies in 30 to 40 years will be in the Department of History, not the Department of International Politics or Politics. We are going to encounter new paradigms, and now we are shifting towards these new paradigms. While we are shifting, we are going to encounter chaos. In that chaos, we are going to learn how to unlearn and how to develop the new paradigm of thinking. Therefore, yes, nation-state will decline for the sake of much more interconnected and globalized. And the globalization which I'm referring to is not the kind of globalization that now all of us are saying it is failing. It is actually, I don't know what to call it, but I have come to this conclusion that we are going to have globalization 2.0. It is much more interconnected, much more personally and individually based, and at the same time less hierarchical in its nature, more democratic and more equal in nature because of the talent of artificial intelligence and nanotechnology and the fourth industrial revolution, which will reshape the conduct of our economic behavior internationally as well. So we are going to witness a new paradigm of thinking, new terminologies, and new philosophies in economics and in politics. We will have collapse of regional entities. European Union will cease to exist in 30 years. Simply why? Because we will have new entities emerging. Also might be regional or international, but based on shared interest, on economies, and on principles that people could share. Not necessarily geopolitics or security. Don't forget that the European Union eventually is the result of the unification of Germany, the result of the collapse of the Soviet Union, the result of the NATO trying to expand to Eastern Europe, and many other factors. Economics might become important, but not geopolitics and not geography in particular, because of this kind of a new economy that will emerge. Then we are going to have a collapse of the United Nations. In 30 years, we cannot afford to continue to have this old regime challenging our common sense. This is a result of a situation which has already died long time ago. This cannot continue to be. We are going to have a new entity which is running major and important assets for us. The planet, environment, rules of economy and communications, rules of globalization 2.0, of internationalism, that needs a clean and needs a canvas, a moral canvas to lead us, rather than security-based entity that is in a way corrupt against the poor and corrupt against the marginalized. The last point, and the most important as well, we are going to witness in the next 30 to 50 years a human shift psychologically and politically towards something much more common than before. Today, I can sit wherever I am and communicate with colleagues and develop networks and organizations and alliances with people living in Antarctica or living in North Pole. It doesn't matter for me. I don't even have to travel to them. I can communicate and have meetings with them. So my relationship